Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into reciprocal tariffs. You've probably heard the term. It's this huge economic idea that promises to make global trade fair. It sounds really simple, right? Almost like common sense. But the big question is, does it actually work? It's a really powerful, super straightforward slogan. The idea is simple, tit for tat. But turning that simple idea into a policy that actually works? Well, that's where things start to get a little more complicated. Does this bold strategy to level the playing field actually deliver on its promises? To figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to start with the promise itself. When this policy was rolled out back in 2025, it came with a very clear set of goals. The whole thing was sold as this kind of economic silver bullet. It was supposed to do four big things: put a stop to unfair trade, slash the trade deficit, bring American manufacturing roaring back, and on top of all that, funnel billions of dollars straight into the US Treasury. Sounds pretty good on paper, right? Okay, so that's the promise. But how do these tariffs actually work in the real world? Before we can even look at the results, we have to do one thing. We have to follow the money. At its heart, a tariff is just a tax. That's it. In this case, it's a tax slapped on goods that are brought into the country, and it's specifically designed to match or even go higher than the taxes other countries are charging on American stuff. Probably the easiest way to think about a tariff is to just imagine a sales tax. When you go to the store and buy something, that tax gets added on right at the register. A tariff is basically the same idea. It just gets applied way earlier in that product's journey to you. And this little journey right here shows you exactly who ends up paying. So let's say a US company imports something, like a smartwatch. The second it crosses the border, the US government adds the tariff. The company that imported it, the importer, has to pay that tax. But they're a business, so to protect their bottom line, they pass that extra cost on. And that means it's the American consumer who ultimately pays the higher price. All right, so now that we get how the money flows, we can dig into the data. Did the results of this policy actually live up to all those promises? Let's take a look. Remember that big promise to shrink the trade deficit? Well, the data shows the gap, it hardly moved at all. And this tells us something really important about the economy. Trade deficits are driven by these huge structural forces, things like the strength of the US dollar or national savings rates, not just by import taxes. So while the trade gap didn't change, something else did: the cost of living. Inflation, which we measure with the Consumer Price Index, was up 2.7% as of June 2025. So the big question is, how much of that increase was because of the tariffs? Well, economists figure that tariffs were responsible for about 0.2 to 0.4 percentage points of that total inflation. Now, that might sound like a tiny number, but for a family on a tight budget, any extra cost on things you buy all the time, like washing machines or clothes or shoes, it adds up fast. And what about bringing back American manufacturing jobs? The results here were, well, a really mixed bag. Some low-tech industries did see some small hiring bumps, but our more advanced manufacturing, the kind that relies on complex parts from all over the world, actually got hurt because of higher costs. And then you have our big export sectors, like farming. They were about to get hit with a whole other problem: retaliation. And that retaliation is a huge part of the story. It's the ripple effect. Because these policies don't exist in a bubble. They set off a chain reaction, with consequences that are felt not just across the globe, but right here at home. Not surprisingly, other countries didn't just sit back and take these new taxes. Our major trading partners, we're talking China, the EU, even our neighbors like Canada, they hit back with tariffs of their own. And look at what they targeted: politically sensitive American products like soybeans, dairy, and bourbon. They chose those very carefully to create the most political pain back in the US. To see what this actually looks like for real people, let's just take the example of an American soybean farmer. This isn't just a statistic. This is someone's livelihood we're talking about. This number is just staggering: a 70% drop. After China hit back with its own tariffs, our soybean exports to what was once a gigantic market just fell off a cliff. And what's wild is that this is almost an exact repeat of what we saw back in a similar trade fight in 2018. It left American farmers with way too much product and plummeting prices. Now, let's look at something you might have in your pocket. A modern smartwatch isn't just made in China anymore. Its journey is global. It might be put together in Vietnam, but the microchips are from Taiwan, and the tiny sensors come from Germany. Tariffs can add extra costs at multiple steps along this global supply chain. The result? The final price for an American buyer can jump by 20, even 30%. It's basically a tax on global collaboration. So, after looking at the promises, the mechanics, the hard data, and all those ripple effects, we can finally get to the verdict on this thing. The analysis really shows this policy is falling short for 5 big reasons. First, it can't fix those huge structural issues like currency values that are the real drivers of the trade deficit. Second, American consumers and companies are the ones who actually pay the cost. Third, it sparks retaliation that really hurts U.S. exporters. Fourth, it just doesn't create that massive wave of factories returning to the U.S. that was promised. And finally, it creates a ton of uncertainty, which businesses hate. So if the goal is to make American industry stronger, what's the alternative? Well, most economists suggest a totally different toolkit. They talk about more targeted, surgical approaches, things like incentives for high-tech manufacturing, strategic investments in research, and big pushes in workforce retraining. Building our competitiveness from the inside out. And all of this brings us to our final big takeaway. Reciprocal tariffs are politically powerful, for sure, but they've proven to be a really costly experiment economically. It leaves us with this huge, lingering question. In today's incredibly connected world, trade wars are pretty easy to start, but what does it actually take to win one? And is a tariff even the right weapon for the fight?